Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And I still see that folks are jumping on, and that's great. We appreciate you being with us here with us live today. We got a great discussion webinar ahead all about how to identify and fix your candidate drop-off points. We've got Gem, we've got Cockroach Labs. I'll introduce those folks in just a second. And then it's brought to you by Talent Board and the Candidate Experience Awards. My name is Kevin Grossman, and we welcome you here. Housekeeping, and then I'll introduce our panelists that we have today. So we are recording this webinar, although we're glad you're here live, and we want you to engage us as well. We've got poll questions ready for you. We're going to stop and ask if you've got questions after each question that the panel gets to answer to. We want to make this engaging for you and definitely worth your time today, and the insights hopefully that you're going to take away back to your organizations. And we want you to share with us too, because we're always learning every single day. So let me introduce our panelists. We've got David Delaney, who's Senior Manager of Recruiting at Cockroach Labs. Hi, David. Oh, on mute, David. You're on mute. That's all right.
Thanks, Kevin, for the intro. As you mentioned, my name is Dave Delaney. I work over at Cockroach Labs, one of the recruiting leaders over there. Been with the company for just under 4 years, so coming up on my 4-year mark. Joined in 2018 when we were about 55 employees. We're about 450 at this point. Spent the 5 years before that at a company called Yext, growing from about 180 to just shy of 1,000 when I left there, and then got the startup bug again, so made my way over to Cockroach Labs. And if anyone's curious, people usually ask about Cockroach. Cockroach, the idea is we're a big database company. And we're resilient. Can't kill a cockroach. The database doesn't go down. So if you're curious about the name, that's kind of the TLDR, and just wanted to share that as well. So thanks, Ken.
It always is fun to hear about the origin of names, and so Leigh, that's coming for you too. So Leigh Miller, Senior Customer Talent Advisor at Gem. Welcome, Leigh. You don't have to worry about it. It's all right. It's all right. But welcome.
Thank you very much. Excited to be here. And David, I had no idea that's what Cockroach Labs was named after. So thank you for that piece of knowledge to kick us off.
And David, what's the trajectory for the rest of the year growth-wise?
Yeah, so as everyone knows, this has been a very interesting year with the economy and everything going on. So still working through some prioritization, but looking like we'll probably end somewhere above 500 or so. So
okay.
It's been, about 8x growth since I started.
That's great. So we've still got, then that's the good news, right? We've still got hiring going on.
Right.
So there you go. And it is I call it's a bonkers upside down recruiting and hiring world. Definitely, for sure. It continues to be. So thank you both very much. A pleasure to meet you both. And what I'm going to do now is stop the share, actually stop the slides show, because we're just going to have us talking to everybody. So let me stop that. So we just see us now, just us. So how we're going to do this is we got some kind of partition segments that we're addressing this topic of candidate drop-off points. We're going to talk about challenges first. And before I go to the panel for them to answer, I'm going to share some recent research that we've done at Talent Board. Every year we do core benchmark research with companies big and small across industries around the world, not just in North America. And we're asking them a lot of questions about their recruiting and hiring process and what the candidates are experiencing. We also do a lot of side projects too that relate to different topics and some things that I wanted to share. And then we're going to ask you all, the audience, what your challenges are. So we're starting with challenges, right? It's kind of like case study 101. What is the deal? What are the walls you're hitting up against right now? And some recent research that we did at Talent Board, some of the things that are applicable to this topic today. Candidate ghosting definitely is a high challenge. I'm sure many of you would argue, and I know, David, you're probably going to touch on this a little bit too, has been an issue that many companies have been facing today, and 32% in some recent research we did said it was definitely a challenge, and one of the bigger ones overall. I mean, it's everything from pre-application all the way to the final stages, and even after accepting offers, it's happening. And so again, it's been quite a world we've been in the past 3 years. Engaging passive talent is another challenge that we found that is always tough for companies, but especially in this market that we're in now. 31% said that they were struggling with that. Other challenges that are similar, and then we're going to ask you, the audience, is, for example, application volume drop-offs, right? That's part of what we're talking about right now. Was another one. Inadequate employee referrals, that was also on the list. Creating compelling job descriptions, employer branding, the list goes on. And so I just wanted to highlight some of those things. So before I have Leigh, you and David comment, let's ask this audience first where they're at, and then we'll hear from you both. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right, so let me queue up the first poll question. So we're going to ask you, you'll see it on the screen, everybody, and you select all that apply in this one. What are your current challenges when it comes to engaging and nurturing candidates today? So everybody give us a vote. There we go. Select all that apply. We'll give everybody about a minute and change to do this. And then I'll share the results, and then we can hear from David and Leigh. So again, what are your top challenges today in engaging and nurturing quality candidates? And, you know, this may not even be the exhaustive list, but these are some of the core ones from other research that we've done that we wanted to ask you about too, that relates to this topic today. All right, we'll give it another 20-ish seconds. Everybody get your vote in, get your vote in. Almost there, almost there. Okay, anybody else before I share? There we go. Got a couple more. Oh, there we go. I woke somebody up. That's what happened. I'm just kidding. It's a joke. All right, here we go. I'm going to share the results now. Boom. All right, you should all be able to see that on your screen. And I can scroll down. It looks like the biggest one is candidate accepting another offer, right? That is followed by, it looks like, candidate ghosting, which we just talked about, right? And then there's a lot of things that are kind of in the running for third and beyond, right? So you've got candidate diversity, outdated and underutilized technologies. That's why we have Gem on the webinar today. Employer branding and inconsistent and non-targeted candidate communications. Don't say that 5 times fast. Don't do that. But what do you think? David, let's start with you. What do you think about these challenges that everybody answered today?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's you always want to hear to see if other people are experiencing similar challenges, and you hope it's not just you or your company. But this was definitely in line with when I was asked this question. The first thing that came to mind was basically other offers and people not showing up. And I think it was really interesting. And now as we look back, 2+ years ago when COVID first kind of came around and everyone was making this transition, as most of us in our industry did, to fully remote and virtual and interviewing, we were so focused on just making that switch that there are some of these kind of unintended consequences that came out of it that have been really fascinating. And it's opened up on both sides, a much larger candidate pool in many ways, but on the flip side, a much larger opportunity pool for candidates as well. Nobody has to fly across the country from San Francisco to New York and skip 2 days of work and sit in an office for 8 hours to interview. They can do it from their home, from their desk. And now, instead of talking to 4 companies that are local, they can talk to 20 companies internationally all at the same time. And so it's definitely, unlike anything I've seen before in candidates, expressing interest and then not showing up for a recruiter screen, or having an interview scheduled and the day of, canceling or rescheduling, or, they're just starting their search and then 2 days later they have an offer and they're no longer interested. And these things always have happened to some degree, but I feel in the last 2 years, it's unlike anything I've seen, and it's really accelerated. And in some ways, I think it's good. It's pushed all of us to be better and better with how we conduct our searches and how we interact with candidates. But it certainly has had a whole level of challenges that are new and interesting, and definitely something to consider. So I would say, my experience has been very much in line with those top 2. Those are the ones that immediately come to mind, with candidate drop-off and then other offers coming very, very quickly in the process.
Yeah, thanks. And Leigh, I think we've only just begun to see the change that's coming from the past 3 years, right? I know we're experiencing it now and the pain of it all, and the good and the bad for candidates alike, companies alike. But this is like, we've never been here before. But anything else that you want to comment on the challenge side though, too?
Yeah, I mean, I think those top two that stood out there around other offers and then ghosting. The other offers I'm not surprised with, given the volatility of the market, the number of people who are looking to change roles. They've taken this opportunity to say what else is out there. And so being in that place to have multiple offers at the same time is great for candidates. And I'm not surprised that companies are fighting for that talent. I am curious, though, around what that, it just makes me think about what's behind that. Like, do companies know that it's about compensation? Is it multiple offers? Is it they've decided to stay? Like, the reasons behind that, I'm always curious to understand. And the same for ghosting. Like, when that comes up as a challenge for a lot of you, I'm curious around what causes someone to do that. Is it lack of communication in the process? Like double clicking into that, I think that's a signal, but what is behind it and what are the insights and then what you can do about it? That's what kind of stands out for me.
Absolutely. Thanks, Leigh. And just really quick out to the audience in the chat function. I mean, tell us, if for anybody that wants to comment really quick, do you have, I mean, have you been having experience more candidate ghosting and or the reasons around that? Yeah, I know the market is changing with layoffs. That's true. Absolutely. But there's still, like, how many, is it still true? I know we haven't seen the jobs report for July yet, but you've got still 2 jobs for every available candidate, interested candidate for that matter. I mean, it's still a very, very bizarre market. But anybody else identify issues? Is it salary disparity? Is it flexibility? Things that are driving candidates to go back and forth and change their minds? I'm just curious. Anybody want to pop in the chat really quick? What you're hearing with your own candidates? Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Well, I got a poll question anyway, so we're gonna move on with another poll question and go to the next section. So thank you, David and Leigh, for that. Talking about challenges. Now, let's ask you all this. What do you see the most of your candidate drop off? Where do you see most of your candidate drop off today? And it's going to be one of these 3 answers: top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. And again, pre-application, application to screening, offer acceptance, etc. Tell us where you're seeing. Oh, and somebody did respond. Salary was one of the big reasons why folks were jumping. Sure, got it. So let's give it another multi-offers. Yep, been hearing that too. Another 30 seconds. So everybody give this one a vote if you haven't done so. Where do you see the most of your candidate drop off today? And we'll share with that in just a second. Yeah, speed is always super critical. I mean, I think candidate communications, which I'm sure will be a recurring theme for the rest of this conversation too, is consistent and timely candidate communications. It's hard to sustain, right, David? I mean, we can talk more about that in a minute after I share this, but all right, here we go. Let me share the results for this. Again, where are you seeing your candidate drop off? And predominantly is middle of funnel for everybody here. And then followed by kind of slight edge on bottom, and then top is third in this particular context, but a close second for both of those, but definitely middle of funnel. Response to this, Leigh, what do you think?
So my first response, and maybe I should ground everyone on kind of my role at Gem, and that will help with the answer. So my role at Gem is a senior customer talent advisor. So I work with TA leaders across all of our customers and work with them on their talent strategies and bring insights and industry benchmarks as well. So my role at Gem is I actually have a holistic view of what a lot of our customers are doing, and I'm not in the depths as a practitioner or a TA leader, although I used to be one. But having said that, when I think of and when I see that data point come up around it being at the middle of the funnel, it kind of speaks to what we were seeing within our Gem benchmarking report that we brought out last year as well. So our benchmarking report draws from 2 million outreach sequences and nearly 12 million candidate interactions, active and passive. And the date for that was back in September 2020 to October August 2021. So it's a little bit outdated considering how quickly the market is moving at the moment.
Sure.
But what it did show that when it came to the middle of the funnel, what we saw is an aggregate pass-through rate is around 33% from that pre-on-site to on-site. And we saw a lot of discrepancies with the different size of organizations as well. But what I think that tells us is that if there's anything within your organization that's above like 33% of folks moving from one stage to that stage to on-site, to dig in, or if it's significantly under that 33%, to dig in to see what's going on. And there's so many things that can go on at the middle of the funnel. I think that's the big thing. That's the handover with recruiters to hiring managers. That's where assessments come in. There's just a lot that happens there that is kind of ripe for being a major drop-off point. But I think there's the drop off in the negative sense. It's unintended and you don't want to see that, but it's also the positive. That's where there's self-selection out of the process as well. But again, like digging into what that means. Is it calibration with your hiring manager? Is it around there's bias in the process? Is it that need to really just think about what that assessment was doing with candidates and whether folks opted in or not? So I am not surprised that that is a major drop-off point, because historically that always has been. And I think that what we see within Gem, and when you're looking in using, for example, the Gem platform, able to like double click into what is actually happening when it comes to pass-through rates, and to get a sense of what is the story, what is it telling us, and how can we explore further.
Excellent. No, Leigh, I thank you for sharing that. It is, the market does continue to change so dramatically, but I think one of the things, David, that I find, and we've been talking more about at Talent Board too, is that you as the employer have a lot of automation in the front end, and it's pervasive throughout too, of course. Great recruiting technologies utilized, and then there's more human interaction as you get past post-application with folks that get screened, assessed, interviewed, but you still control the dials, right? You control the dials of your tech, you control the dials of your processes, of what you're saying to candidates, when you're saying, and what timeliness. But it's hard for companies to sustain that, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you brought that up. And I saw a comment in the chat too. I think it was from Sean, about how it's interesting that we were focusing on the candidate and not the company. And I think this is important. We're switching that right now as we talk about this. And Leigh, you made a great point. That middle part really is where we as the company can make the biggest impact. Not to say we can't on the front or the end, but like you said, there's a lot of automation. And so Sean, thank you for calling that out, because I think this is important, where I think that middle part is where we do need to adapt the most, that interaction, the efficiency, the engagement with the candidates. And I would say we're still seeing trouble in the beginning and the end, but where we're seeing the biggest spike of change is in that middle part. And that's really where we've been driving ourselves to adjust and make changes as necessary, and adapt to the kind of the current landscape that's out there right now. But I also think it's important to recognize, and Leigh, I think you said also, the sort of the self-select out, recognizing that not all drop-off is bad drop-off. And that's okay, because I think people are exploring more opportunities than they normally would, or just checking things out and getting a better feel. And I'm a big believer that we need to find the middle ground. We should adjust where we identify that there are areas to adjust, but also not sacrifice our process or what we're trying to do in that. And so I do think it's important for us to look at ourselves as a company and identify what is necessary for us to continue doing, and not just saying like, hey, let's cut our interview process in half so we can go as fast as possible. But are there areas where we're missing that engagement with candidates? Are we not providing the best possible experience? And see if we can, like you said, Kevin, kind of turn the knobs there a little bit and tweak that, and find that where we're balancing what we need to do to properly assess, while also moving quickly, efficiently, and providing that best candidate experience. So I do think it kind of comes from both ends. And I don't have any strong evidence for this, but anecdotally, I do think there are some companies that chose to move faster than they would have previously, or make some decisions that they wouldn't have. And that's where I think that is okay for us to see some of that drop off, because as much as I don't want to lose a great candidate, I don't want to hire someone that's not a good fit on both sides, just because we're acting in a way that we feel desperate or moving too fast. So, yeah.
Well, and there's only one thing that candidates care about. That's about getting hired. It's all they care about, getting the job, and most won't for any given job that they're interested in. And yet everything that we're talking about here, and which is what I want you to focus on a little bit more now, David, too, is the processes and the technologies that you implement and put into place. All of those things affect the perception of fairness, my positive and negative sentiment and experience I have as a candidate at the end of the day. And even if I don't care about any of it, or even aware of that it's actually happening, but it's super critical. So how have you been leveraging and improving on your processes and your tech stack to overcome those challenges, especially the middle that you were just talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think data is key just to start off. And Leigh, thank you for that great kind of rundown of the pipeline, the different things you've done there. Because if you don't have the data, or if you're not looking at the data, or if the data is not right, then you're not going to make any progress there. And I have to say, we've been using Gem for a long time, and I think one of the things that we early on realized was we put together what we call our company guide, which is not just like what we are as a company, but it talks about our values and it gives some insight into the teams. And we're able to see that people are really engaging with that in our Gem outreach and our campaigns, which is a really powerful thing. Like, people talk about money and title, and yes, those are valuable, but actually we're seeing one of the things that comes up in our candidate surveys, which we do at the end as well, is in talking about our values and that company guide. They're referencing that from the very beginning. I think right now, with so much turbulence out there, those areas are really important for people. Things like, is this a company that resonates with me? But if we don't have the data, if we're not able to dig in, we're just going off what we want to believe to be true, or what we think might be true. And so I think at the very beginning, using tools like Gem, and also we do a lot of dashboarding with our team. We're very fortunate to have some incredible analytics built out right from the beginning, looking at pass-through rates, drop-off rates, acceptance rates, and really digging in, because I've also worked at places where you just kind of make your best guess, and honestly you end up just kind of spinning in circles for most of the time. So I think it's utilizing that data through various different tools that are so different than when I started recruiting, where it was spreadsheets and guessing mostly, quite frankly. And then also using that to drive the personal engagement piece and those communications. You mentioned that the timely communications, Kevin. I think that's critical right now. It doesn't necessarily need to be speed of necessarily moving through the process in 2 days, but making sure people hear from us and within a couple of days and get that follow up. So I can talk about more of kind of the specific tools. I think generally that's where we've been looking at what can we make more efficient through digging into the data, and then using that to drive better decisions and better engagement.
Yeah, we don't want to, it's not what we think we know, it's what we know we know.
Absolutely.
Right. And to make better decision making. I mean, that's why we have the technologies that we have today. It's why we have data. We have to be able to understand what that data is telling us, and where those, and all the things that where the weaknesses are and the strengths. And that's why we do benchmark research every year at Talent Board too, to help companies with that. Before we go to the next poll question, Leigh, did you want to add anything before or segue, or you want to wait till after the poll question?
No, I'd love to add something. I have certainly seen from customers that we work with in Gem a real concerted focus on looking at their overall technology stack, and getting a sense of how at each point of the candidate journey and the hiring process, how technology can really augment and support the recruiter experience, because I think there's always ways that we can improve how we go around hiring, and there's new technologies coming out now and then, and not to say jumping on the next shiny thing, but what actually adds value to you as your organization and what you're trying to achieve. So we certainly see that, and it's evolving, as I'm sure we all know. And I'd love to hear later on when we go into Q&A some of the focus, the areas of focus on this call as well.
That's excellent. Yeah, thank you, Leigh. And so here's a question for you, David, from Mr. Marvin. I know Marvin. The question is, did you build your talent brand to appeal to the masses, or just to a segmented, targeted audience? So is it more of a targeted focus with your outreach, or or general purpose, or both?
That's a really interesting question. I think, when I started, we were 50-ish people, and probably 35 of them were software engineers. We're a database company. They were building it from the ground up. And so, at that point, it was highly focused. So we're really addressing not only software engineers, but a very, very small segment within of these sort of distributed systems and database development, and which is a pretty niche area of there. So in that part, I mean, even our onboarding, I remember going through and it was really geared towards engineers, and I was kind of in over my head at that point too. But then as we grew, we realized, well, hey, this is something where we have to spread out to a broader audience. We need to appeal to folks not only in different divisions and different functions, but different countries and different cultures, and really make sure that we're also not making assumptions about who we should be appealing to. Like, let's not, decide who we think will be interested in us. Let's put out who we are to people. And if it's something that resonates with them, then see if that's a good match. And trying to sort of remove some of those biases that we just naturally have of like who we think will want to work with us, but let's showcase who we are. And let's attract those folks that, really are in line with our values of respect and balance and transparency that we have. Because I think that is something too that more and more is becoming such a factor to people. Not to say that culture and values weren't important in the past, but I do think that over the last couple of years, people have been looking to that more and more. I guess I'm a little biased in this regard too, but I think we do that really well. And that's something that we're really proud of, and we want to make sure we get out there. So I'm not sure if that necessarily addresses that question, but I think it's something that's evolved over time, where we had an idea of who we thought we wanted to brand ourselves to, but recognizing that maybe that was really too narrow of a scope, and let's put ourselves out there to more people. And if they like it, then we can have that discussion, as opposed to us making some assumptions early on.
And Leigh, that's something that we have found, gosh, for many years now in our benchmark research, is the fact that candidates, the things that they're consuming the most on the front end before they even make the decision to apply is that they do want to understand more about the company. They do want to understand more about cultural values, diversity and inclusion initiatives, community sustainability initiatives. I mean, yes, salary and benefits are there too, of course. And is there flexible work, if there's opportunity to be remote or not remote, but it's those things. What are the career path opportunities? What are the employees saying that's consumed a lot to understand? Is this a place for me? Besides that, maybe the price is right for me potentially. And Gem, continues, as far as my take has been growing as well. And is that something that you think that was that part of what attracted you as well when you went to Gem?
100%. So I joined Gem just over 3 months ago, and I had been at my previous organization, LinkedIn, for 8 years. Making that transition, it was very important to me around the values of the company, the mission, what it was trying to achieve, what it looked like from a diversity workforce perspective. All those things are really important, and became even more so important during COVID, when I'm analyzing, like, I spend so much time here. I need to make sure that this is a place not only that I enjoy the work, but I care about what the company does. So now when I think about how candidates are applying for roles and what their experience is, I have recent experience of doing that myself, and that was very much top of mind for me. Sure. So any organization who is able to show who they are, what they care about, you'll have folks who are going to connect with you straight away, and really engage with you straight away, because it's aligned to their own values.
Exactly. And again, if it's not, then self-select out, right? Yep. As well.
And that's perfectly fine too.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So did you want to say something else, David? I'm sorry.
No. I was just agreeing with what Leigh said. I thought that was perfect. Right.
So I got one more poll question for everybody. That'll segue us to the next sections that we want to talk about. So here we go. Launch. So when it comes to pinpointing recruiting issues and making improvements, everybody, is your organization data driven? The answer is yes, or should be. The answer is yes, but yes, no, unsure. Let us know. We'll take about a minute from this, and then Leigh will go to you next in regards to not only what we find, but talking more about that too. Because it's, again, the data, you got to have that information. You got to know what's happening when throughout the process. And, I would always argue getting candidate feedback too is super important to understand and be able to round out that as well, besides what you're finding in your systems. All right, another 20 seconds or so, and then we'll share. So vote away if you haven't done it. When it comes to pinpointing recruiting issues and making improvements, is your organization data driven? Almost ready to share. Ah, that's a good point, Tom. Yes and no. Is it the right data point? Yes. You know, we've been evangelizing. I mean, I've been in the space for over 23 years in HR and recruiting tech primarily. And I know that, you know, everybody wants to have that single source of data truth. And that has not been easy to get to, especially on the recruiting side. So I hear you on that, Tom. Okay, let's share now. Here we go. All right. So we've got almost 70% said yes. And that's good. That's good to hear. About a quarter said no, and then you had some of you that just weren't sure, but that's, again, you know, not totally out of place, as I don't know what I'm trying to say on that point. So Leigh, what do you think about this? And then we'll segue to about other ways that you've seen recruiting teams focus on fixing those candidate drop-offs with the data too, as well.
Yep. From that poll, I would actually love a second poll to see how comfortable individual folks are with being data-driven. So at an organizational level, yes, sure, organizations maybe, but at an individual level, what does that mean? I think that's key. So that kind of, my mind immediately went to that.
Yeah. So real quickly, while you're talking, tell us, folks, individually, tell us in the chat, are you comfortable with data? Yes or no? There you go. Okay. Yes. Great. Definitely. Well, I think that love data. Look at all the love data is there. Okay, Leigh, go ahead.
Awesome. I think in the chat also, Annie and Tom may have made this point too around the distinction between the right data and also what you do with it as well. I think that's really telling. Anyone can have data, and that's actually not the point. It's then what the insights you glean from it and then the action that you can take as a result. So I think that is the challenge that we all have. And to your earlier point too, Kevin, around having like a single source of truth of what is telling me the actual story and how can we bring it all together. And I saw an earlier comment in the chat around what about all of the activity that happens pre-application and what's going on there. And so having the ability to see full funnel data of everything, both in the ATS and all of the activity when it comes to passively sourcing, I think is really powerful. And so what I've seen in terms of data is for customers who have been having like smart ways to fix their drop-off points or the ways in which they use the data, is first off is to have it, and as I said, in a single source of truth and really be able to trust what they see. And then to be able to use that data in a way that you can cut it via various dimensions. So look at what is actually happening through the recruiting funnel when it comes to gender, ethnicity, where their drop-off points via location, by team, etc. Those are what's that kind of information, or getting down to that kind of level, is what can be really powerful. So you can start to see, okay, what are some of the trends that we are seeing, and what can we do about that? What kind of conversations does that spark?
And trying to analyze the why of it. So
why,
right? This is why, this is what's happening. Why is this happening right now? And then what can we do to, again, double down on what's working and try to fix what's not based on what's happening, especially if we're losing, you know, too many candidates at the point of early screening and assessment. Why is that happening? And right?
Yeah,
what
exactly.
do we need to do to fix that? Did you want to add anything to that, David?
Yeah, I think just one thing that always comes to mind when talking about this, because I think the point of making sure you have the right data is certainly important and certainly something to keep in mind. That said, I wouldn't let, if anyone on my team is here, they've heard me say this a million times, but don't let perfect be the enemy of good, because you don't know what you don't know. And I think so many times places try to get everything so perfect. And at least in my experience, until you start just gathering the data and looking at it, you're going to realize 10 different times the first time you look at it that you wish you had pulled something else or added another parameter around it, or had another thing in Greenhouse to pull certain data from it. So I think it's important to look towards getting to the right data, but I wouldn't expect it to be right necessarily off the start. And I've definitely seen people or companies or teams get sort of paralyzed by that fear of, well, what if it's not right? Well, the sooner you start it, the more historical data you're going to have. And that's when it becomes really valuable over time anyways. And after you do it long enough, it starts to correct because you're gathering more, and just the way numbers work, the more data you have, it sort of averages out. And I think the earlier you can even just get started. And so I've been very fortunate to work with an individual, Shannon, on our team on the recruiting ops side, where we've done this with 2 companies and started it much, much later at our last company. And you're going to have to go in and probably tear some stuff out and fix it anyways at some point. So I think the goal of getting to the right data and figuring out what that means for your team and your organization is super critical, but don't expect to get there immediately. And I think that's really important, seeing how this evolves over time and how you use the reports over time. And I think the other thing I would just add, and anyone that's saying, no, they're not data driven. I mean, one, I think we talked about, you need the data to make the right choices, of course, but as a recruiter or a TA or, talent or HR or people ops person, we tend to be the ones that the fingers are often pointed at anyways when something is not right. So I think just even selfishly having data to sort of show what you've been doing and protect yourself, like how many times have people on this call heard, well, there's no pipeline, or where are all the candidates? And if you don't have the data, for example, to show that, then it just becomes a, they say, you say kind of thing. And so I think just even from being able to show your work and what the progress you're making, that's so important. So, plus one, everything Leigh said was spot on as it's been throughout, but I think that was just one thing that comes to mind too, is just adding that piece of like, don't try to get it all perfect right from the bat, but also have it quickly and readily for your own kind of just peace of mind as well.
Some of the highest rated companies in our benchmark research every year still always have something to work on. Oh, I mean, it's the way it is. It's not easy. There's so many business impacts that are affecting the business all the time. Who plans for a pandemic? Leadership changes on the team, recruiting team changes, merger and acquisition activity, changing priorities, new products and services. I mean, all those things impact recruiting and hiring. And we know when things take a turn, recruiting, unfortunately, is the first to go. When there's an upturn, it's the first to frenetically come back. And we've been seeing all of that in a very concentrated time period in the past year that we all just want to go take a nap now. Time to, right? I mean, yeah. So, speaking of that, now what I want to do, David, is segue. After all this discussion that we've had, tell us about your measures of success then. I mean, we walked through the process of what challenges were and what you were doing and how important data is, right? In this context. What did you do to improve it, and what were the measures of success, and how are you sustaining it? Speaking of sustaining.
Yeah, so I think, just to kind of come back to this, first and foremost, you have to start getting it in place. You have to have a baseline. You have to know where you're starting from. And I think sometimes, and I think earlier in my career, I felt this too, people were afraid to see the data because you're going to be graded or you're going to be doing something wrong. But I think until you have that to start from, you can't show the progress. And that's sort of the first step of it. So really, looking at everything from, what is our response rate? Doing A/B testing up front with our sequences, our gem campaigns, like trying different titles, different content, starting there, all the way through our candidate response, candidate survey at the end. And everyone that comes on site or face-to-face, not on site, face-to-face at this point does get our candidate feedback survey. And it's not just about, were the interviewers knowledgeable, but it's around, do you feel like this was an inclusive and fair process? Do you feel like we were communicating effectively? And we give everyone the opportunity to leave feedback there as well. And the first time we sent it out, it's a little scary because you're going to get some stuff that's not always going to be, shiny and nice. But as nice as those compliments are, if you don't get the constructive criticism or feedback, whatever you want to call it, you're not going to keep improving. So I think that's something where it ties back to our communicate openly and honestly, our transparency value that we have. Like, it's not pointing fingers, it's let's talk about how we fix this and how we address this. So that's been something where we factor that into. So we're really big on OKRs at our company. We've done them since I've been there, and we have them up from the company level down to the division, team, sub team, and they all tie back up. And we really want to make sure that, not saying we're going to get to 100% right off the bat, but we're making progress. And I think that's the key too, is are we incrementally getting better each quarter and making progress in the right direction? Not saying we're going to have a perfect process tomorrow or that we're going to remove all unconscious bias from our process, but what are the steps we can take and show that with the data and with the feedback, both from our candidates, from our hiring managers, and from the tools and the response rates themselves to see that we are moving in that right direction. And sometimes it looks really great. And sometimes we identify another area that, hey, actually, we're not doing so hot. But those areas where you're not doing well are there, whether you identify them and talk about them or not. So, just by not pretending and not discussing them, it's not like they just go away. So I think that's when really a really healthy approach that we've taken here too is this isn't about pointing fingers at different teams or, well, they don't know what they're talking about. The candidate has no idea. It's like acknowledging that this is going on and addressing it, and then setting a goal to push ourselves for the next quarter. So I think some sort of goals, and it doesn't have to be a fully built out OKR system right from the start, but having goals, measuring those, and then showing that progress over time is the most critical thing. And that's something that we've done for almost the 4 years I've been here. Each quarter we go through, we review them, we talk about them as a team. What were the highs, lows? Where can we improve upon? And OKRs used to scare me and make me furious, and I hated them. And now it's kind of like, yeah, this is what we do. This is how we measure and we look at it. So there's all these different pieces throughout and the different tools we use, but at a high level, having those goals, measuring that improvement over time or lack of improvement, and what can we do to address it to make progress going forward.
And I'm sure that when you have a leadership team as well that wants to know all the bumps and bruises and wants everybody to work in concert to help, make it a better opportunity for all those who come on board at the end of the day, and to retain too over time. I mean, it does not go away. Just because you don't measure it doesn't mean it's gonna go away and fix itself. It's just, but that's not the case. And so why don't you, Leigh, as we round out this discussion, and we'll see if there's any other questions from the audience too, about David's story or even what you've shared, Leigh. Expound on that a little bit further based on what else you're seeing with your customers too, measures of success, et cetera.
The first thing that comes to mind when I think of measures of success is really first that Peter Drucker quote, you can't change what you can't measure. So when you're thinking about sustaining improvement and looking for efficiencies in your pipeline, decreasing your time to fill, looking at that, the data is the key there. And I think too, when you were talking, David, around OKRs, I'd probably, for me, I'll bring it back to like a rec by rec level. And just thinking about the measures of success and improvement in the partnership, I think, with the hiring managers, and being able to, again, go back to the data that we've just talked about and those drop-off points, and using that to really drive accountability, the partnership with your hiring manager, and ultimately success at the end of once you've got that great hire. So I think that observations I've seen with customers, that having all of the not only the clear goals, but the ways in which to measure it along the way and pivot and adjust to really be able to hit those hires and those goals that they've got. But as I said, the big piece is the celebration of all that hard work that each individual recruiter and their hiring manager puts into each search.
There is every year, when it comes to even getting candidate feedback data, there are companies that are leaning into wanting to have data help them drive improvements, or the ones that are like, yes, I get it, we need to do this. But then there are those who are just like, I don't want leadership to see how bad the candidate experience is. I mean, I know, right? We do this every year, but I'm sure it's true about any of those data sets throughout the process. You got to know. You got to start. You got to. That's the only way it's gonna get better at the end of the day. So folks, if you've got any final questions for us, go ahead and post them now. I actually want to ask each of you. So David, let's start with you. A lot of great stuff that we shared today in this discussion. Where do I start? Like, if I know, like, there's just stuff I've got these challenges that you've all outlined today. I mean, what should I be doing first? Is getting my data house in order? Where do I start?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing I would say is don't try to solve it all immediately. I think that's also something that people try to take it on, and they're like, well, how am I going to figure out pass-through rates and acceptance rates and then by division, and they get so overwhelmed by all of this. Like, if you don't have anything, start with something. What are, start with a candidate feedback survey, quite honestly. I mean, something that you can get some actionable input from very early on. And that's a pretty straightforward, and that you can begin there. So I think you need, that really resonated with me, what you said, Leigh, like you can't change what you don't see or you don't know. Like if you don't have that, like you're just going blind, and it's very good chance, and I've done this myself, where you're going down a path and you find out later on that was not even the right, like you're in another town over. It's not even like you're close to what you should be looking at. So I would say, yeah, I think getting that data in place, and it's been interesting watching these last few years, recruiting operations and analytics has taken off in a way that even when I started in recruiting, nobody really talked about that. That was like, occasionally somebody did it, or people ran their own Excel sheets, with VLOOKUPs on the side. And it was all sort of like recruiting was a gut thing. And I think now that we've seen how powerful it can be to start with that data. So yeah, I would say first and foremost, like, and that maybe even goes back to having a process in place. Don't just throw things together, like have a structured process, because that's going to be key to the data. So start small, start with something little, and don't try to solve it all at once, because it's all incremental from there.
All I need is a slide rule and an abacus. That's it. that's everything. It goes. Here's a good question, Leigh. I'll segue to you a little bit, and I'll change it a little bit, just because you did touch on something, David, about how we have come a long way. And I think systems can and do better communicate with each other today, and should, with APIs as they are, and just better partner ecosystems too. But there is still a lack of integration and communication though, right? And if you're, Leigh, I'm sure you've got customers that have multiple recruiting systems. David, you probably do as well, right? It's that, how do we mitigate that to make sure that the data is going where it needs to go?
Mm-hmm. I think that's the big question. I mean, having a source of truth is kind of foundational to everything else that you'll be doing, but it can be difficult to create that. There is Gem being one of the solutions, and the reason why I joined, that it is a single source technology where it integrates with the ATS, with other technology providers as well, and is able to collate everything to that place where you can trust what is happening and all interactions are tracked. So I think that that is the like table stakes. I think that it's taken a long time for our industry to get here, but that is what's really going to be really powerful for folks. So you're not working off spreadsheets. The number of organizations that I've worked with where we had, each recruiter had their own spreadsheet. I look back and I think, how did we do that? So I think that's a really key step to getting us all to work smarter and more efficiently, because we have this source of truth at our fingertips in one click.
So David, how many times have you or one of your team or colleagues and peers have asked, can I export this data? Can I export this data?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I'm talking about, right?
It's really interesting. I remember we were doing an ATS transition in my last company, and this was probably, 2014 maybe. So it was when Greenhouse was still pretty small and early on, and there was pushback from another member of my team because they wanted to go with one of the more established ATS. And what stood out, there's several things that stood out to me. Customization of Greenhouse was one of them, but their openness to integrate with other technologies and the way it works with Gem so seamlessly. I mean, not to generalize, but recruiters tend to be a little bit of creatures of habit. And if it's not something that fits into how they, sort of generally do things, you have this new tool, you pay all this money, and it just sits on the side and no one uses it. And I know it's probably not the best solution for people that are running into that challenge, but I think to what Leigh said, her point, like you need these tools to work together, or else you're just paying for something to sit there and frustrate people, quite frankly. And I think that ease of integration and use is just a critical thing to be successful.
Here's another data point question that came in too. Is time from first awareness to hire a metric, David, that you're looking at? Leigh, any of your customers are looking at? So from first awareness to hire, is that something that you look at?
So we have two. We have like application to hire and hire to start are two that we look at.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I would say probably not necessarily first awareness necessarily.
That's harder to track too, in a sense, isn't it?
Yeah, and then I mean we've thought about it a little bit because we do have individuals that say come to a tech talk, and then 6 months later when they're actively looking. So it's sometimes you don't want to be too caught up in it because that would look bad if it's like 6 months from time to hire. But actually, that's a really amazing compliment that 6 months later when they are actually looking, they remember that event and they come back to you. And again, just a shout out to Gem, but we do these quarterly kind of newsletters where it's just people who have expressed interest, either applied to our talent community, and we use that to just say, hey, this is what's going on. If you're ever looking, like, just keep us in mind. And we've seen that lead to hires 6 months, 12 months later, just from that like touch point there.
Yeah. So and before we see if there's any other final questions, I just want to cue something out really quick, Leigh, and let you, if you would like to just say a few words about Gem before we wrap too. And how's that?
Yeah, love to. So for those of you who are not on Gem or haven't heard of Gem before, and I've obviously been referencing it a number of times throughout our conversation today, but Gem is a talent engagement platform and helps recruiting teams use data and automation to engage talent more deeply. So as said here, build diverse, high quality pipelines and higher predictability at scale. We have a number of great customers that we work with, Cockroach Labs being one of them. And really what we see is that our customers love that single source of truth capability that we have. There's also our Talent Compass product, which is all around data analytics, looking deeply into the hiring talent pipeline and the funnel, and then creating executive level dashboards. So it is, if you are not on Gem, check it out. I certainly love using Gem, and I can really see how it's really changed the game for practitioners and leaders to really get a sense of what is happening within their hiring teams and to improve for the future as well. So as I said, if you're interested, contact sales@gem.com and we will get in touch and share more.
That's great. Thank you, Leigh, so much. And David, thank you as well for doing this great discussion webinar today. Thanks everybody for coming. I don't think there's any other questions, just maybe some folks are commenting right now, and I appreciate you all sharing and staying engaged. These are interesting, bizarre times that we still continue to live in, everybody. So we're glad that you're all here with us today and have joined us. And again, we'll make sure to send out the recording to you all by tomorrow. And again, thanks everybody for coming, and Leigh and David.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks everybody. Have a good one. Bye-bye now.